There's many who peddle a message that is not the gospel. They peddle a message of temporal prosperity right here in this world. They peddle a message that does not save. It's a gospel of cheap grace. It's a gospel that is man-centered rather than Christ-centered. It's a gospel that promises the world and neglects the necessity of denying yourself, taking up your cross daily, and following Jesus. People don't want to hear about self-denial, cross-bearing, and submission. But that's the gospel. The gospel has teeth to it. It has a bite to it. And it has healing properties that this world knows nothing of. And it's got to be preached in truth and in purity, or it's not the gospel. And that's the gospel that has revolutionized and transformed individuals and families and nations. I also had a chance to be a part of a movie called Fireproof a couple of years ago about marriage. If you haven't... And it was an honor to be a part of that. There's some talented and godly guys in Georgia who wrote that movie. I had the chance to audition for the role of the firefighter and play that role. And if you are struggling in your marriage and have not seen that movie, I encourage you to see it. Simply because it draws from the scriptures some very powerful principles that can heal and restore your marriage by first healing and restoring you. I'm working on a project right now that I want to share with you because it fits in very, very appropriately with World Hope Ministries. I'm turning 40 years old this year. I've got 6 kids, like I told you, and I realize that my life is probably half over. And I'm looking toward the future of my children, wondering what it's going to be like. And I'll be honest with you, I'm very concerned about what I see happening in our country. Aren't you? Yeah. I mean, I look out and I see financially, I hear people talking about an absolute collapse of our economy. That we just wait till the other shoe drops with this recession and the depression. We've never been in so much debt in the history of our country. Morally, we're falling apart at the seams. I mean, oh my gosh. What's happening to the family? What's happening to the basic institutions of marriage? What's happening? Even within our churches. It's scary. And spiritually, we have something like 80 to 90% of kids growing up in churches who are walking away from the faith of their parents, never to return by the end of their first year in college. Churches are being sold, evolving into other things. It's frightening. And so I look at this, I turn on the TV, I turn on the radio, and I say, okay, explain it to me. What's the problem? And what's the solution? And all I hear is people yelling back and forth at each other. It's the left, it's the right, the rich blames the poor blames the rich. You got government blaming big business, business is blaming the government. You got the churches blaming Hollywood, Hollywood is blaming Christianity for all the ills of the world. Everybody's yelling, everybody playing the blame game. I can't figure out what the solution is listening to them. They can't even figure out what the problem is. And so then I thought, wait a minute. God is not that, it's not that difficult. Maybe it's as simple as we have forgotten the very principles that made our nation so great in the first place. Do you realize that the people that started our country were not politicians? They didn't come over with an army. They didn't come over with all that we think they must have come over to establish the richest, freest, most prosperous nation the world has ever known. How did they do it? And maybe we just need to uncover those things and get back to them. Maybe it's as simple as that. that our forefathers had enough foresight to know that we are self-centered as a race, and that we would naturally veer away from what was essential. And so maybe they would have known that and would have left us a map or a trail that would get us back to where we need to be. Maybe they knew this day was coming. And so I talked to a friend of mine who's a Christian historian, and he began telling me about the history of the Pilgrims. And I was blown away by what he was saying. You know, this was stuff he would tell me was not what I was hearing in history class growing up. You know, I'm always hearing the bad things about Western civilization, and we came over here, and we took the land away from the Indians, and capitalism, and all this is bad, 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 bad. And he was giving me a whole different picture of who these Pilgrims were. I said, "Are you serious?" He said, "Come with me. I'm going to Plymouth with my family one summer, and I want you to come show me this stuff." And he took me around for a week and a half with my family in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and up and through Boston. And what I saw made me cry. I couldn't believe it. And my first reaction was, I was angry. I was angry at what I saw when I read those documents from our founding fathers and from our forefathers, those who came off the Mayflower. And when I went to the graveyard of Governor William Bradford and those who came off and died in the first winter after settling in Plymouth, and I looked at the monuments and what they did, who they were, I was angry that all this had been hidden from me as a kid growing up in school. And there's a monument there that is just jaw-dropping. Lays out the Pilgrims' view of our country and their strategy for building a nation, and it's called the Monument to the Forefathers. And I decided, oh my gosh, I cannot believe this. I've got to bring all my friends here, and I've got to show these guys this. And so I decided I'm going to turn this into a documentary. I want the whole world to see this, because this is the greatest crime of the century, that people don't know this. And so what I did was, I decided to learn more about the Pilgrims. And so I went to England, and I retraced the escape route of the Pilgrims. Before they were known as Pilgrims, they were called Separatists. And I followed them and their escape route from England. I went into the dungeons that they were thrown into in the castles there, and visited the underground secret meeting places of their church. And followed the path all the way to Holland, and then across where they settled in Massachusetts. And then went to Washington, D.C. to connect the dots between our forefathers and the founding fathers, those who signed our documents, the Constitution. And I'm telling you, the great heritage of our nation is amazing. The treasure of our country, the things that made it great, it's not our military. As important as that is, praise God for a strong military. We need that. But that's not what made us. It's not anything that you would hear on the news today. The treasure of America is not found in a chest made of wood that came over in the hull of a little wine ship called the Mayflower. They didn't have any money. They had 400 books and some chickens. The treasure of America came over in chests of flesh, in the hearts of men and women who loved the one true God of the Bible and loved His Word and decided to use it as the blueprint to build a brand new nation. That is the true heritage that we have as a country, and you are not hearing that. Our forefathers, our founding fathers, were not a bunch of deists. We were not pulled together by some vague set of patriotic principles. Let me read this to you from Governor William Bradford. This is the governor who came over on the Mayflower and governed the Pilgrims when they landed. This was their leader. And he said in his original source document, this is the journal that Bradford wrote for the first 30 years of their settlement. Bradford said the reason they came was this, quote, to lay a good foundation, or at least of making some way towards it, for the propagation and advance of the gospel of the kingdom of Christ to the remote parts of the world, even though they should be but stepping stones to others in the performance of so great a work. That's why the Pilgrims came here. They weren't just a bunch of opportunistic people looking for land with big tall hats and belt buckles on their shoes, not knowing how to plant corn. These were brave men and women. They were Christians who came here, not for religious freedom. They had that in Holland. They came here to start something new. And they came here for the advance of the kingdom of the gospel of Christ to the remote parts of the world. And they were willing to risk their lives and lay down, face down in the mud and blow bubbles so that their children could use their backs as stepping stones to advance the gospel to the ends of the world. That's global missions. And America has become the launching pad for the whole missionary movement, and send more missionaries out to more places. I love this country. And it was founded by Christians on biblical principles for the purpose of advancing the gospel. What is this great gospel? Really quickly, I want to give you my take on the gospel. My wife just called me. I'll call her back in a second.
Hello.
I'm sorry, my thoughts are just always interrupted when my wife calls me. The gospel of Jesus Christ is altogether different than the message of other religions. It stands head and shoulders above every other theological system because of who it's about and what he has done. The gospel is a story of two Adams. Did you know there's two Adams in the Bible? There is an Adam in the garden. He is the first Adam. And there is the last Adam, Jesus Christ. And there are parallels between the two. This is really cool. Listen to this. In the garden, remember Adam was put into a deep sleep. And that word deep in the Hebrew is a death-like sleep. It's a deep coma-like sleep. As if I were to put you into a sleep so that I could open you up and remove an organ or a piece of your flesh, close you back up and you not feel it or remember it when you woke up. That's a deep sleep. Adam was put into this deep sleep in the garden. His side was opened up, a rib was taken out, and Eve, his bride, was born. Adam was then woken up out of this sleep. God brought her to him, and he said, "At last, flesh of my flesh, bone of my bones." And the Bible says the two became one flesh. Now jump over to the New Testament and the last Adam. That Adam, when he was on the cross, was put into death by God, which the New Testament refers to as falling asleep. His side was opened. Interesting. Blood and water came out. Interesting. And his bride, the church, was born. God raised him up out of that death and brought her to him. Jesus said, "No one comes to the Son unless the Father draws him." And Jesus calls his bride, the church, his body, his flesh. The New Testament says that it's a great mystery, Christ and his bride, and the two are one flesh. The first Adam is in a garden when Lucifer enters a serpent who comes into the garden to betray and deceive.